recognized guest and one Rotarian. When I call your name, please stand and remain standing until I've gotten through the whole list, and please hold your applause until the end. Colin Jorgensen, guest of Michael Bynum. Jay Mitchell, guest of yours truly. Jill Floyd, guest of Ellen Cockrell. Elise Synode, guest of Ellen Cockrell. Rhonda McInnes, guest of Ellen Cockrell. Jess Porter, guest of Elizabeth Small. Lance West, guest of Denver Peacock West. Lauren Waldrop, guest of Laza Rasa Femenjato. Hope I pronounced that right. Tim Caldwell, guest of Denver Peacock. Desi Beers, guest of Leanne Burnett. And Catherine Lords, guest of Greg Hatcher. And I'd also like to recognize a visiting Rotarian, Terry Brown, visiting from Albany, Georgia. Thank you, Terry. Please, let's give everyone a round of applause.
Good afternoon, Rotarians, and thank you, President Denver. I'm really excited to introduce our newest member. I just met her a couple of weeks ago when I interviewed her for a story about the Historic Arkansas Museum event that's happening Saturday night. And we hit it right off. I mean, we had so many things in common. In fact, we were almost neighbors and we didn't know each other. So I invited her to join me at Rotary, and by golly, she did. So here we go. And Molly McNulty really wanted to introduce her, but Molly is under the weather. So Molly wrote this introduction. So if it's wrong, it's Molly's fault. All right. I am happy to introduce our newest member to Club 99, Erin Finzer. She wrote this for me. I got to know Erin while I was interviewing her for a party. She is the, She's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and a Professor of Spanish at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. From the Office of the Provost, she oversees curriculum and continuous improvement. She has led numerous classroom to career collaborations. Her research on Latin American culture studies has appeared in the Latin American Research Review and Hispania, where her work was awarded the 2017 Outstanding Scholarly Publication Prize by the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. Erin, an Arkansas native, received her BA in Spanish from the University of the South, Sewanee, and her PhD in Spanish from the University of Kansas. She and her two daughters, Blanche, who's 15, and Eleanor, 11, live in the Quapaw Quarter. Erin's currently the Vice President of the Historic Arkansas Museum Foundation Board and a member of Christ Episcopal Church. Please help me welcome our newest Rotarian, Dr. Erin Finzer.
Thank you, Chris and Rachel. Our new member streak is still alive. 15 weeks, folks, 15 weeks. That's 4 months. Thanks to all of you for helping ensure that those who need to be here are here each week and that they see the value in what we're doing here at Club 99. We can't do it without everybody chipping in and being a part of making sure your friends and your colleagues know what we're up to. Congrats to Erin. Welcome to Club 99. Next, we'll have an online update from Greg Ramon, who is, I think, in Denver, my namesake city. He's going to give us an online update on Saturday's Arkansas Drug Take Back Day. Is that correct, guys?
That is
All right,
correct.
Thank
Thank you very much, President Denver. I just want to say hello, fellow Rotarians, and hello from Denver, Colorado. It's that time of the year again. This Saturday, October 29th, will be the Arkansas Drug Take Back program. And it is so important that you participate, not only yourself, but as well as the folks in your companies, because it's such an important topic. Every time I talk about the Drug Take Back program, you can't help but talk about the crisis with opioids that exist in Arkansas. We continue to see deaths from overdose climb in the state. We have about 1.7 million residents, and on average, on an annual basis, there's about 2.9 million prescriptions that are given to Arkansans for opioids. Of that, about 170 million pills are issued every year. But there's some good and better news. So prescription-wise, Arkansas does use more than the national average. But on positive note, we also collect a lot of either prescriptions that are either expired and or aren't needed anymore. And as a matter of fact, we rank second in the nation, 15.5 pounds per 100 people. That is a lot of prescriptions that are collected. And we rank 11th in total weight. Now, as a state, we're 34th in population, but when we rank 11th in total collection, that's just outstanding. Since 2010, we have collected 233 tons of either prescribed or over-the-counter medication. And we have over 200 law enforcement agencies that help during this event. So great opportunity. The other thing that's awesome is we rank number 16th in registered collection sites. And that doesn't include the 270 permanent drop-off boxes that exist throughout the state. Many of them were purchased and or the assistance from the Rotary members themselves. Why is this important? Why should you participate? Teenagers and young adults who reported abusing prescription drugs say the majority of them they got either from their friends, their family, or acquaintances. And you would think that at some point most of those would come either from the street or pharmacies or what have you, but they don't. They come from people's homes. So it's really important to get rid of those prescriptions that you no longer need. And not that opioids aren't bad enough, but it also becomes the gateway drug for folks that are addicted to heroin. 3 great reasons to do it. Obviously, you get rid of unused drugs. It's important to do that. Secondly, you reduce the ability for those drugs to either get misused and or accidentally used. And then the last thing is you discard them in the most effective manner. And what do I mean by that is you really don't want to throw those drugs into the garbage. They will end up in the environment. You also don't want to flush the medication or pour it down the drain. Wastewater utilities, and obviously I should know, can't remove most of the constituents. And so they will end up in the waterways, which will impact the fish and fowl. And let's keep in mind, we really have a one water concept. And so there are folks downstream that may be using the water for drinking water. So again, impacting them. And then I want to just state that, we talk about teenagers and young adults getting into the drugs. Don't forget your pets. I know that for the most part, it's difficult to get them, even when you wrap them in all sorts of food, to get them to eat or to take their prescriptions. But it's amazing. Almost 20% of the calls to the Poison Call Center are attributed to pets consuming the medication. So President Denver, I just want to remind everyone, Drug Take Back program this Saturday, it's the perfect time. Please look through your cabinets. Please look and look at the expiration dates. Some people, I guarantee you, have aspirins that are 5 and 6 years old. So please use this day to discard those drugs properly. And President Peacock, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Greg. It's an important initiative to Rotary and Club 99. We've been a part of this since the beginning. And if you'd like to get more involved or engaged, and I think you will after you hear from our speaker today, please let Greg know, because we need help. We're always going to need extra support. And it's something you can help out and serve our community this Saturday. A reminder that our District 6150 Foundation Banquet honoring Club 99er, past president and district governor David Menz is this Thursday out on the Heifer campus. We'll feature the 20th anniversary of our Romanian Farmers Feed the Children program that was led by past president excuse me, Gary Parrish, who was honored last week. If you weren't here, be sure to go back and watch that. I think we have a few seats left, Karen. So if you're interested in joining us, please let us know. We'd love to plug you in for the event Thursday night. Next Tuesday, we will have a very special Arkansas Cinema Society Filmland program. And we're going to get a sneak peek of The Voo, a new documentary on the Rendezvous Barbecue Restaurant in Memphis with Arkansas filmmakers Jack Lofton and Jeff Daly of Mudroom. Don't be surprised if we have a special rendezvous-inspired menu and possibly a few ribs from the legendary restaurant. Trust me, next week is not the week to skip or watch online. As many of you know by now, during our La Petite Roche Tricentennial, I will spend my year as president telling unique stories about our region's past 300 years. With Halloween upon us and all the spookiness that goes with it, I'd like to share with you the story of Arkansas's most famous cemetery, affectionately known as the Westminster Abbey of Arkansas. Located south of I-630 and just west of Broadway, anyone who was anybody in the 1900s has a plot or land in the Mount Holly Cemetery. It's the final resting place for 11 governors, 13 Supreme Court justices, 4 U.S. senators, 4 Confederate generals, 21 Little Rock mayors, several military heroes, physicians, attorneys, and business leaders, and others who made significant contributions to the arts, literature, politics, and religion. In 1843, Roswell Beebe and Senator Chester Ashley donated a 4 square block area to the city of Little Rock for the purpose of a public cemetery. Although a commission had been set up a few years later to oversee its operations, it wasn't until 1915 when the Mount Holly Association was set up by several women to supervise its maintenance and upkeep. More than 100 years later, the association, limited to 20 women with an annual budget of approximately $70,000, continues its important role. A few of you may be on that committee, I'm not sure. Now to a few of the prominent Arkansans buried there. Sanford Faulkner, who popularized the Arkansas Traveler in song and legend. More about that later. John Gold Fletcher, a 1939 winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. U.S. Senator and U.S. Attorney General Augustus Hill Garland. J.N. Heskell, editor of the Arkansas Gazette from 1902 to 1972. That can't be right. He was the one who, though, lamented about our namesake founding bicentennial going unnoticed. You may recall me telling that story a few months ago. Arkansas Territorial Governor George Izard, a major general in the War of 1812. George R. Mann, the initial architect of the Arkansas State Capitol building. You may recall that story as well. Cephas Washburn, a Presbyterian missionary to the Native Americans, who preached the first Little Rock sermon in 1820. Our clergy friends in the audience may find that of note. His son, artist Edward Payson Washburn, best known for his oil painting, The Arkansas Traveler. Isaac Watkins, in whose home the first local Baptist church was organized in 1824. Arkansas Gazette founder William E. Woodruff, the oldest paper, longest serving paper west of the Mississippi, and Weldon E. Wright, financier of the Brooks-Baxter War. Here's a couple of stories. W.B. Worthen, the founder of Worthen Bank, at one time Arkansas's largest bank and now part of Bank of America, is also buried there. He built the tallest monument in the cemetery and was known for standing at his office window in the old Worthen building, and through his telescope, he could evaluate the cemetery grounds. He was notorious for calling the sexton and requesting that work be done to the cemetery. The 17-year-old David O. Dodd, the likely Arkansas's most famous casualty of the Civil War, is buried there. His family moved to Little Rock from Texas to be closer to his sister's school. When the Union Army occupied Little Rock in 1863, the Dodd family evacuated to Camden behind Confederate lines. Later, David was issued a a pass to visit Little Rock to see his sister. Upon his return home, his pass was taken by Union soldiers, which would have been fine, except the next day he was stopped again. And this time, when they asked for his identification, he had no pass. They searched him and found a page with dots and dashes discovered in his boot. The Morse code message outlined information about Union troop strength in Little Rock. Dodd was arrested, convicted of being a spy, and hanged. The family plot for the Albert Pike family is in Mount Holly, even though Albert Pike is buried in Washington, D.C. Yet Quaddy Ross, the first wife of Cherokee Chief John Ross, has a marker there. While on their way to Indian Territory via steamboat in the midst of the nation's tragic Trail of Tears relocation effort, she became ill, and as the Ross party was reaching Little Rock, and she succumbed to pneumonia. She was buried in the city cemetery, and after Mount Holly was opened in 1843, Albert Pike had her remains moved to his family plot. In 1935, the U.S. Daughters of 1812 had a new stone marker installed at the head of her grave, as the original was missing. And today, visitors frequently leave rocks, coins, and other gifts on her gravesite. A more recent addition to the famous cemetery is Ronald A. Robinson, an eccentric Arkansas PR guru and ad man who was widely known for his love of stamps, movies, and Arkansas memorabilia. Skip Rutherford, Jordan Johnson, and I, along with a few prominent Rotarians, have been working with Club 99er Congressman French Hill to get the Heights Post Office named after him. He has a very unique burial plot and is worth checking out on a future visit. The fountain within Mount Holly was donated by Molly McNulty's parents. It had been on the side of their home in the Quapaw district and now lives close to Gain Street in a tranquil area. This beautiful cemetery, with its fascinating markers and famous residents, holds a unique place in our state's history and has been on the National Registry of Historic Places for more than 50 years. But what about the final resting place for the founder of Club 99, our own Sidney M. Brooks? Surprisingly, despite his strong ties to the fabric of Little Rock's past, it's not at Mount Holly. His burial marker is at the nearby Oakland and Fraternal Historic Cemetery Park. And that's our Illuminating the Rock story for this week. And now I'd like for President-elect Natalie Gadotti to introduce our guest speaker and moderate our program today.
Thanks, Denver, President Denver. Okay, thank you. All right, guys. Well, I'm very excited to be back up here, and particularly thrilled that I get to introduce our speaker today. So I'll kind of tell you a lead up story about our speaker, Sam Quinones. So last year, about October, November, I was listening to NPR and I heard a segment that Sam did an interview on his latest book, The Least of Us. I had actually just finished reading The Empire of Pain, which is a completely separate author and book, but it's about the clear role that the Sackler family in Oxycontin played in the opiate epidemic. And it's this thick of a book. It was I literally couldn't believe that this happened in our country. And so then I heard Sam's interview and I literally went immediately and bought his first book on the drug crisis, Dreamland, which came out in 2015. And then bought The Least of Us, which actually just came out last year. And we're so lucky because the first time that's in paperback is right out there. So right after this, he's got the hardback and the paperback on sale and you can get it signed. But it's cool because Sam got to see it for the first time in paperback out there, which is fun. But so I literally just read these books. I read them over the Christmas holidays and we're at Big Cedar with the family between Christmas and New Year's. We always go up there and like I'm reading these whole paragraphs out of The Least of Us to Jason, my husband. He's like, God, I mean, this is like not holiday content, but okay. I'm like, but it's so important. It's so important. And, you know, I sent Sam an email. I sent him an email and I just said, hey, I'm just a random person in Little Rock, but these books are very powerful. The storytelling that Sam does is amazing. He's an amazing journalist. There are stories of just real people that this crisis has affected, plus just the ins and outs of how this crisis is happening, where it's come from, who's part of it, all of that. And he wrote me back 15 minutes later and was like, oh yeah, I'd love to have a phone conversation. I'm like, oh my God, fangirl. Okay, so I get on the phone with him. We talked for about almost an hour and I was like, you have to come to Little Rock and I want you to come to my club because the people who are in this club are decision makers in our city. They can be a part of the solution here. And I wanted him to come. So he said, I'd be glad to, let's figure it out. The next two people I contacted was Nate Coulter, who you guys know is a beloved member of our chapter and over the Central Library system. Started talking to Nate, maybe we could bring Sam to the book festival, which Sam has been to our book festival. He came in 2015 with Dreamland. And then the second person I called was Mark Hayes. And a lot of you know Mark. Mark is the executive director of the Arkansas Municipal League. Whitney is a member of our club. And Mark so wanted to be here today, so very much. He is having a kind of emergency surgery tomorrow, so he cannot be here, which he's really sad. But I reached out to Mark because I knew Mark would care, because 2.5 years ago, Mark and his wife, Allison, lost their son, Wells, to an overdose, to this horrible addiction. And he was only 23 years old. My son's a senior in high school. Wells went to Catholic High, just like my son's at Catholic High. This is real, guys. I mean, we all also lost a college senior last week, and many of you know his parents. This is a horrible thing that is going on, and we need to know about it. We need to listen to these stories, and they're raw. I mean, the stories that are in The Least of Us are very disturbing, and you think, my God, this is happening in this country. I mean, Sam told us last night at dinner, he's been working on his story. He's been in LA, on Skid Row, where the tent camps are, which is a direct result of fentanyl and everything that is happening in the drug crisis. So this is real. And that's why I wanted Sam to come here. And it's almost a year later from all of that, but I'm so glad that he's here. So let me just give you a brief, I mean, Sam was like, please, for the love of God, don't read this whole bio, because y'all, he is, it's got a long career, but I'm going to give you the highlights. His journalism career has spanned 35 years. He is a freelance journalist, but he worked for 10 years for the LA Reporter, I'm sorry, the LA Times as a reporter. He spent 10 years in Mexico reporting, which I believe he would probably tell you is a highlight of his career, in the stories that he was able to cover in Mexico. Everything from, he was telling us last night, the popsicle makers in Mexico and how it helps these low-income families come into the middle class. So he was covering everything from that to lots of things on immigration. And, you know, along the way, he interviewed gang members and this type thing. So his first two books are some stories from from that coverage in Mexico. But Dreamland, well, let's start with The Least of Us, which just came out last year. So that was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award for Best Nonfiction Book of 2021. Dreamland in 2015 won a National Book Critics Circle Award for the Best Nonfiction Book of 2015. It's also been selected as one of the best books of 2015 by many: Amazon, Daily Beast, BuzzFeed, Seattle Times, Entertainment Weekly, Audible, the list goes on. It was also selected as one of the best 10 true crime books of all time based on ratings and list on goodreads.com. So the list goes on as far as amazing accolades for Dreamland, and I'm sure more will come for The Least of Us. So Sam and his family, they lived in LA, but they're now in Nashville, so he's fairly close, which is great, and he's enjoying country music again. So I'm going to ask him to come up here, but I would ask that you guys listen to what Sam has to say today, and just know that what I hope we learn from today is that, you know, there are teens, there are mothers, there are grandfathers. Everybody is being affected by this crisis. And I think that we need to remember that our discomfort with addiction is why we need more stories and testimonials like Sam puts in the book. We need to be talking about this, guys. We cannot be hiding in the shadows about it. We cannot ignore things that are right in front of us. We have to openly talk about addiction and how it's affecting our entire country and all of us personally. So Sam, I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
Thank you very much. Is this working?
Is this working?
It's
Okay,
working?
yes.
Okay, thank you
Great.
very much, Natalie, for all your
Oh, you're so
hard work and
welcome.
bringing me here. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And I forgot to mention, and Denver will remind you too. So Sam, we're going to have a conversation today, but if you want to hear more, Sam is part of the Six Bridges Book Festival tonight at 6:30 at the Ron Robinson Theater. I will also be moderating that because Laura Montevardi, who is with KRK, who has also dealt with addiction, a loved one overdosed. She has a very personal story, but unfortunately she's got a terrible COVID cough hangover that this cough will not go away. So I'm going to fill in for her. So this is practice session today with you guys. But come and listen more from Sam tonight. So let's do this, Sam. I'd like to start out with basically the landscape of drugs, you know, of the drugs in this country. In your two books, you know, you kind of in Dreamland, it took us from the opiate epidemic, which is everything from big pharma to Mexican cartels to small rural towns, to the least of us, which really focuses on fentanyl and methamphetamines. So talk to us about what you're seeing today in the streets and in our homes,
Right.
and how it's moved from plant-based drugs like heroin to synthetic.
Yes. First of all, how you guys doing? Everybody good? Great. All right. Nice to be with you today. Beautiful town. I was just on their bridge over the river there. I love going on these rivers, man, that we have all over this country. It's so beautiful. Anyway, so what's happened in the country is in a nutshell, very briefly, that we created a new population of opioid addicted people nationwide through our very, very aggressive, wanton, you could even say, prescribing of opioid painkillers for all manner of things, and an idea pushed largely by the drug companies that these pills were now no longer addictive, or were known to be by science to be non-addictive if used to treat pain. And the truth is science knew nothing of the kind. But we saw beginning in the 90s, an increase in prescribing nationwide, coast to coast, like an airplane taking off from a tarmac, just like that for 15 plus years, something like that. A lot of people got addicted. A lot of people died. A lot of it was from over prescribing for athletic injuries, a dental, wisdom tooth extraction, on and on. There's a million different ways in which these pills were over prescribed because doctors grew to believe the idea that these were no longer known to be addictive for people who were in pain. The problem was it left out that you have to pay a lot of attention to the people's backgrounds. For some people, it was fine. It was fine. These drugs, in fact, are really important parts of medicine. They're just and pain treatment. They have a very important role in pain treatment. That role just is not to be in every American's medicine cabinet, and it was very close to happening that way. Along the way, the Mexican trafficking world figured out that all of a sudden in the United States we're creating this new consumer market, and they began providing heroin and opioids. Heroin is an opioid; it's just a different kind, very chemically similar. And so people would then get addicted to the pills. Maybe their doctor would cut them off, whatever. They would have trouble finding them, or they were too expensive on the street. Frequently, there were these black markets in every region of the country. Normally, these pills were $1 a milligram. If you're doing, if your tolerance is up to 150, 200 milligrams a day, that's 150, 200 bucks a day. You can't do that. sustain that. And so people would switch then to heroin. And that is how we created a brand new heroin market in a real nutshell, of course, how we created a brand new heroin market coast to coast. All this heroin coming up from Mexico. And that was really the story that I wrote in my first book, as Natalie mentioned, Dreamland. Came out in 2015, and for which, as she said, I came here to your book festival that year. However, as one thing that I want to say is when I was writing Dreamland, I encountered deathly silence. Nobody wanted to talk about this. Nobody, if you had a loved one in the family, the last thing you want to do is let everybody know that this person was now addicted, or that this person had gone away to his third rehab, or had died on a toilet in McDonald's with a needle in his arm. These were things that did not get all the obituaries, fabricated cause of death. When I was doing Dreamland, I found just nobody none of the families really wanted to talk about this. So it was enormously surprising to us when the book came out, and all of a sudden it began to kind of awaken people, and people began to understand that they were not alone. You began to see people coming out of the light, out of the shadows and into the light. And you began to see this, it was really a massive movement of people into the light, talking about their stories. This is one of the most important grassroots movements of our time, except for it's never understood as such because there's no president of it, there's no spokesman, there's no press release. Now you got to be in it to understand that happened, but it changed a lot of what was going on at the time. So governors and attorneys general and media and on and on and on, people came to understand the enormity of the problem because people were coming out of the shadows and talking about, and that's what I encountered. Much to my surprise, I began to get these invitations to come speak, and I was like, yeah, of course I'll come, because I thought no one was going to read the dang thing. You know, I was going to be onto another project in 6 months is what I told my wife. And so as time went on, and I would say also within a year, my publisher was saying, you need to write another book about this topic. And I was like, I was exhausted. I was worn out. I was like, my little brain was like full, like a little hard drive, you know, it's like nothing more, no more space. But also I was thinking at the time, like I'm a crime reporter. That's basically, I view myself, old school crime reporter. I thought to myself, Dreamland said it all. What, after all, this was 2015, 16. After all, what could be worse than heroin? All right. And as I travel the country and over the next several years, well, I found out. And what could be worse than heroin? And where we are now, in answer to your question, is that we have transitioned because the Mexican trafficking world has transitioned us, in a sense, to the synthetic era of drugs, meaning drugs that are made without any plants involved, made from nothing but chemicals. And the two most important drugs of this in this movement that's been happening for a while, and now is really coast to coast, are fentanyl and methamphetamine. And they have taken over the country in the same way the pills did, right? The pills were like pain pills. You found them in Oregon, you found them in Oklahoma, you found them in North Carolina, you found them from same thing with fentanyl and methamphetamine. It's an unprecedented idea that we have from one source covered the country with not one, but two illicit drugs, and these being fentanyl and methamphetamine. And that is because they are synthetic, because they control through ports in the on Pacific coast of Mexico, ingredients coming from all over the world. They can get access to the entire world chemical markets through those ports, China, India, but pretty much any place else. I think mostly those two countries though, and China especially. And through which they can make these drugs now year round. There's no more seasons as with plant-based drugs. You know, it's like year round, it's every week. You know, you don't need land, you don't need sunlight, irrigation, you don't need farmers, any of that stuff. You make it all in a lab, the helicopters can't see it, and you reduce your supply chain dramatically. The profitability of both these drugs, especially fentanyl, is just catastrophic, basically, in my opinion. And what has happened now is that the supplies of this stuff are just staggering, really, just staggering. And it's also interesting to me that they have changed in the United States, you used to have these regional drug stores. You go one place, it was one store. You go 500 miles away, it's a very different story. Now it's entirely homogenized, like the offering off of every off-ramp off of every interstate. You get the same Cracker Barrel, the same Hampton Inn, the same Burger King, and the same gas station. Same with dope. It's the same story. You used to have in American history, drug historians will note that we would go from synthetics to depressants to synthetics every 10, 15 years. It'd be like a cycle. That cycle has been flattened out. It's just two drugs, the same two drugs, and it depends on where you are. Is it meth and fentanyl, or is it fentanyl and meth? And that's kind of where we stand now. These are the two most damaging drugs we've really ever known, particularly though, I want to insist, in the supplies that are now being flooding, inundating, and have been now for several years. We're noticing it now because COVID is kind of in retreat, but this has been going on for a few years now. This is not new. This is not like 2022. This has been going on, certainly both of those together since 2017. It's just we weren't, it was developing, then COVID kind of distracted us, and now we're seeing it for what it really is, I think.
And talk a little bit about this, Sam. So the thing, particularly with fentanyl, is if you begin, you immediately become addicted to it. It's highly addicting.
Yeah.
And so, and then it's also being laced into, you know, if you cocaine or marijuana or name anything, it can be laced in there.
Yes.
So that you have people who are overdosing accidentally, but then people who are having to feed the addiction a lot.
Yeah, it's important to understand, by the way, fentanyl is a magnificent drug, right? I mean, surgically, I've had fentanyl. Many of you have probably had fentanyl if you've been in surgery. It's fantastic. It revolutionized surgery in America. It allowed for all kinds of surgeries to take place that when it was invented in 1960, and it's been a workhorse drug in anesthesia since then. And if you talk to anesthesiologists, they will tell you how often they give people a fentanyl in surgery, daily, all the time, constantly, because it's a great drug. The problem is, of course, it's so potent that it's not meant to be in the hands of dope dealers or dope traffickers or whatever. One of the reasons it's so powerful, so helpful, is it brings you in and out of anesthesia very quickly. It's not like morphine where you last and then finally tail out of it. It's boom, 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 boom. And that's what, and anesthesiologists can control that. And they do that, and they bring you right. I had a heart attack. They gave me fentanyl. I actually was conscious for most of my surgery, you know, and then they bring me right out, and I'm lucid and coherent, and on I went. It's the same thing. That property of fentanyl makes it extraordinarily an extraordinary torment for users. No heroin addict, all the heroin addicts in America have basically been transitioned to fentanyl by now, if you ask me, most of them anyway. No heroin addict ever wants to be addicted to fentanyl because you're always coming out of it. There's never hours and hours of break away from the drug withdrawal, the dope sickness, right? It's always right there, and it's about to happen. And so you're never more than 2-3 hours away from it. And of course you can, with any drug, you know, the mixing of it is very bad. And so you could very easily die, even if you have a high tolerance to it. It, however, makes total sense if you're a drug trafficker or a drug dealer, because you now have a customer who will buy more and more often from you all day long. And this is what you're also seeing. And one of the reasons they lace fentanyl I'll put the word lace in quotations because it's no longer being laced. It's just being put in there because people demand it now. But it laced into things like cocaine and so is because and at first heroin, but now there's really no more heroin on the streets. So it's now just on its own. But anyway, you put it into cocaine or methamphetamine because you want to boost the drug, but primarily because you want to create a fentanyl addict from an occasional cocaine user. So a cocaine user might use once every 2 days, 3 days, maybe on the weekend, take a 2-week vacation. Once you get addicted to fentanyl or any opioid, really, there's no 2-week vacation. You have to use it every day. And with fentanyl, it's just simply so powerful that addictive status, it happens very, very, very quickly. And some people die. And people ask me, well, why would you want to kill your customer? Well, most people probably don't technically, but these are people who are also addicted. These are people who are thinking about money. They're not thinking long-term. And the truth is, you can continue to create new customers by simply lacing fentanyl into other stuff. Now, which we have in many parts of the country, and I confess I don't know what the story is in this part of Arkansas. I do know in other states that basically it's people just on fentanyl now. And I met a woman who was a major kind of mid-level dealer in Eastern Tennessee, and she would go into Knoxville, buy every day, and then come back and all her friends and her circle of 20, 30 people were all addicted to pain pills for a while, and then they got basically transitioned pretty quickly to fentanyl. And she told me that she would give her wholesaler fentanyl, those fentanyl test strips you may have heard about, where you can kind of test a drug for fentanyl to make sure that it supposedly doesn't have fentanyl in it. She gave it to him because she wanted him to test what he bought, so to ensure that it had fentanyl in it, because everybody is now addicted to fentanyl. If you're on fentanyl, the heroin will not keep the dope sickness away. And that's the addict's main job every day, is to keep the dope sickness, keep you from diarrhea and vomiting and, sweating and going through that, the withdrawals that are so painful. She wanted him to test whatever he bought to make sure. She said, if it don't have fentanyl, I ain't interested. We ain't interested,
And
so
in that, I wanted you to talk about, so you've all read about and heard about horrible homelessness going on across the country, particularly on the West Coast. And I mentioned that Sam just did an article on the tent camps in LA, which are just unbelievable, but it is all related to this. So I wanted you to kind of speak to the heartland too. We see these stories and it's like, oh, well, that's happening in LA or that's happening in Portland. It's happening here, and it's going to happen even more. And the homeless issue is directly because of that.
can I also say that the other story in all this is connected to that now is the story of methamphetamine, which I suspect may be a bigger story here in Arkansas than fentanyl, although your narcotics agents can tell you that more clearly than I could. And that is that methamphetamine for a lot of years was made with a chemical called ephedrine, which is found in Sudafed pills and all that, right? It's a decongestant and so on. That form of methamphetamine, very easy to make, you don't need to be a chemist to make that stuff, very easy. And the Mexican trafficking world had kind of industrialized that through the 90s into the 2000s. But they never had access to enough ephedrine to cover more than the western side of the United States, and even not even that. Never made it east of Mississippi. So in areas like yours, you began to see, as you probably remember, all these what they call shake and bakers, guys who would make it out of their motel room or their barn or wherever it was. But they were dealing in small quantity, a few grams, a pound, maybe at the most, ounces, that kind of thing. Never kilos. They just didn't have access to the chemicals to be able to do it. They probably weren't capable of doing it so much either in the large scale, most of them. And the ephedrine meth was never good for you. I don't mean misunderstood here, but it was more of a social drug. It was a drug you want to be around other people. You want to be, the life of the party, as one guy said, you want to be everybody's best friend, and you'd stay up for several days, as meth does, and then eventually you'd begin to see these kind of shadow people off here, and But in 2008, a very important change happened that affected every part of this country. Down in Mexico, where the Mexican government cracked down on the amount of ephedrine they allowed to be imported, and really significantly curtailed that. And with that, the Mexican trafficking world, which relied on those importations for this meth industry, had to shift to another form. This is a story I tell in The Least of Us, to another way of making methamphetamine using a chemical known as P2P, phenyl to propanone. There is no benefit to making meth with phenyl to propanone. It's messy. It stinks. There's a lot very complicated, except one, and that is that you can make P2P, the essential ingredient in this method, different ways with different chemical hacks, if you like, different combinations. And all these chemicals turn out to be legal, Industrial, you find them in commonly in all kinds of industry, very easy to, easy to find, very cheap, toxic. And the benefit is that all these, the government can really not crack down on all those chemicals. If there's one way of making it, they crack down on this 4 or 5 chemicals, you switch to this other way of making it. It's very easy. And so what ends up happening is if you control the ports and the importation of these chemicals, you can make the amounts of methamphetamine that dwarf anything we've ever seen. And that's what's happened in the last several years. And that's why you're finding here in Arkansas and many other places, no more of those shake and bakers, no more of those guys making their meth in barns and in motel rooms. It's all been outcompeted by the methamphetamine being made in just such staggering quantities all across this country and has marched across this country. Really, they had to switch in 09, but they didn't really master it until about 2011, 12, 13. And since then, you have seen it, LA, I'm not sure about this part of the country, but I do know that in Kentucky and Indiana and Ohio, it was about 2017, 18 when this showed up. And pretty soon, no more independent, mom and pop meth makers up into Vermont, which never had any meth at all in 2019. But the story that connects to homelessness also is bigger than that. And I thought that was the story I was writing until I talked to this one fella who told me, alerted me to this other thing. And that is that this methamphetamine is not only made in staggering quantities and covering the entire country, it is also accompanied by really rapid onset symptoms of schizophrenia, paranoia, hallucinations, all kinds of weird things, that inability to kind of communicate with people, seeing things that of course aren't there. Every black car is an FBI agent coming for you. All kinds of weird, physical hallucinations, people grabbing you while you drive, people, grabbing your hair, this kind of thing. And along with that, this meth has come this mental illness, drug addiction, mental illness, but also in a very large amount of the homelessness that we're seeing all across this country. It is really a major driver. Now, people don't want to hear that. What I have found in certain parts of this country, largely because I'm not sure of all the reasons. Their idea is, well, it's only a product of high housing. Homelessness is a product of high housing prices. And I'm sure that is part of it, but this is clearly a major driver along with fentanyl in the homelessness. And it creates homelessness, but it also, once you are homeless for whatever reason, the drugs are so prevalent, so powerful, so cheap that very quickly you are using it on the street and then getting out of homelessness, no matter what the reason was initially. Aging out of foster care, release from prison, domestic violence, many, many reasons why people end up homeless. And affordable housing is one of them, as is drug addiction. But once you are homeless, getting out of it under the influence of this stuff is just so difficult. And you're finding very commonly, this is a common story I've encountered all over the country, that people will go outreach to these encampments. Hey, we've got this housing, we've got treatment, all these kinds of offers, and people will not take it, even as the temperatures drop to like lethal, even as people are losing digits to frostbite, even as people are freezing to death. People the encampments have become places of like rank exploitation, pimping, and I would say too that they are not just in Portland and San Francisco and LA. I have seen them in rural Indiana. I've seen them in West Virginia. The whole 3 chapters of my book all about this one town that had no homelessness until this meth arrived. And so these 2 drugs are creating their own special brand of havoc, largely, in my opinion, because they are being made in quantities that simply boggle the mind, and they have to each of their credit, so to speak, their own threat, death in the part of fentanyl, a mental illness very quickly on the part of methamphetamine.
Well, I have like 100 more questions, but we need to open it up because we're unfortunately running out of time. But I would love to catch a few questions from the audience here. Go ahead, Denver.
So China, when fentanyl first began to come in, it was coming from Chinese chemical companies that had been knew how to make it, had been making it for many years as a medical product. But it was coming to the folks in areas of the country that had first began to deal with the opioid epidemic, meaning Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, places like that, through the mail, through the US mail, in small quantities, a quarter of a kilo, a few ounces, they would send this fentanyl. And people in those areas would mix it into something and then sell it as heroin back then. This was 2013, 14, 15. And because they had no idea how to mix the stuff, you began to see, if you remember, clusters of overdoses all at once, 50, 70. And one of the main reasons was that there was this myth on the street. I talk about this in a chapter in the book, that the best way to mix your fentanyl was with a magic bullet blender. You know, those things you buy at Target, they're on infomercials about how great they make salsa and smoothies and all that. We own one, by the way. They're great instruments. I don't want to be ragging on magic bullet blenders. They're just not the way you want to mix your fentanyl. Okay, because it mixes with a blade. Powders don't mix with a blade. They mix liquids with a blade very, very well, not powders. Powders are mixed another very different way. And so you began to see these horrible blends. In 2019, the government of China put a kind of a major kibosh on all that and allowed only a few chemical companies in China to make fentanyl. What they didn't control, though, were the companies that made the ingredients into fentanyl. Those companies that had already been selling those ingredients to the trafficking world in Mexico, that by 2017 had pretty much learned how to make it. And so you began to see then the Mexican trafficking world take off in 2017 with 16, 17, but really by 17 with fentanyl. We would not have, I'm not trying to make apologies for China here, but on this case, we would not have the coverage of the entire country with fentanyl if this stuff was still coming through the mail. You just can't mail so much of it. It's just not logistically possible. We have it because for the last 5 years, it's been made down in Mexico. There's 2,000 miles of Mexican border with the United States. There's a free trade agreement, and there are millions and millions of cars and trucks coming back and forth through, I might add, legal border crossings. That's where it's coming through. We just don't have the manpower, nor frankly, even if we had the manpower at the border, would our economy stand for inspecting more than like 3 to 5% of the trucks that come through? If you were talking about 15, 20% of the truck, all kinds of manufacturers in this area and others would go, hey, you know, we need those car parts. We need those tomatoes. We need all on. So there is this transformation that has taken place over the last 5 years, I would say, since 2017. And since 2000, I say 17 because it's in 2017, you begin to see the Mexican trafficking world really graduate to making those counterfeit pills that contain only fentanyl. They look like oxycodone generics or Percocets or Xanax. All they have is fentanyl in them. The ominous thing about, well, it's not as if that weren't ominous enough, is that they no longer care what those pills look like. Now they're offering them in colors like, look like sweet tarts or whatever those Halloween candies are, all that kind of stuff. The reason that's ominous is because what they're saying, unlike every other counterfeiter in the world, they don't care if it looks like the real product, because the people, the vendors, the buyers don't care. All they want is a pill that contains fentanyl to keep the dope sickness away. And so you're seeing people buying these pills all over the country, really with the expectation that there's fentanyl in there because they're addicted to fentanyl and they can't have anything else to keep the dope sickness away.
But the kids buying it on Snapchat don't know that. So.
And well, there's market segments. There's the veteran addicted market, I was just talking about. There's also the kids who are high school, and this began really in earnest during COVID. A lot of kids, the pills began to hit 2019, 20 in real serious numbers. And that meant that almost anybody, they solved the drug dealer's conundrum through history, which has always been, where do I find my dope to sell? Well, now that's not a problem. That was by 2017, 19, I would say that was really no longer a problem. Now the problem is, where do I sell all the dope I can get my hands on? Well, kids have smartphones. COVID puts everybody indoors. The apps are always there, you know, and so people begin to sell, and this is like the lowest segment of the market. These are people who are selling on Snapchat, or people who know how to use Snapchat as well as those kids, and those oftentimes it's kids themselves, or a couple of years older than so you're finding kids who are buying Percocets or Xanax bars because they are anxious because they haven't left the house in a year or whatever, and you begin to see this new market emerge on Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. So Denver, I know President Denver, we're at our time. So come up, as you're coming up, Denver, I wanted to just end on this quote from you, because I think everybody needs to hear this. This is from Sam's NPR interview. He said, "I came upon this idea that perhaps what this epidemic was teaching us was something that perhaps as a society or a culture we'd gotten away from, which was that we need to attend to the most vulnerable, that we are only as strong as the least of us. We're only as strong as that addict eating from the trash." And that seemed a powerful idea, because I believe the root of the opiate epidemic and really an addiction epidemic is our own isolation. So thank you for being here, Sam.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you all for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Stay right here. Stay right here. Very powerful stories. Thank you so much. Please come see Sam, get a book signed, see him later tonight at the Six Bridges Book Festival. Thank you, Natalie. Really appreciate what you've done. Very somber, but we need to come out of the shadows. We need to deal with these issues. And as part of our tricentennial year, we are pushing the literacy issue in our school district. And so we're doing a book, giving a book to all our authors this year, all our speakers this year, and we will give them a symbol of what we're going to give to all our elementary schools and our resource centers, and it's in your name and your honor, and we will share that at the end of the year. We're also, Sam, and thanks for your efforts in coming to Arkansas, and hopefully as the tradition of the Arkansas Traveler, as you come here and you go have great hospitality while you're here, enjoy our beautiful state. As you go out and tell the story of Arkansas to others, we hope you will be a Arkansas Traveler and share that with others. So
Really nice.
all right, thank you. Thank you. Next week, a sneak peek of the VU. Again, don't miss that. Wear something comfortable it might get a little messy. We really appreciate all of you being here today. And with that, we are adjourned.